All right, everybody, it's 11. Okay, that's a bit loud, sorry. We'll turn that down. How's that? People in the back? Thumbs up? Too loud, too quiet? Just perfect. Okay, I'll go with that. Okay, everybody, so go ahead and grab a seat. Welcome to Psychology 105. Show of hands, how many of you have taken Psych 104? It's not required, but okay, yeah, that's good. How many of you took Psych 104 with me? I see some familiar faces. Okay, well, welcome back. How many of you have not taken Psych 104? Okay, so it's not required, so you can get 100% in this class if you've not taken Psych 104, but there may be a few things that are unfamiliar to you that will be familiar to everyone else, but I'll make sure to clarify those things so that you all can do well. If you took Psych 104 with me, this week you will hear me say a lot of the same things. This week we'll be going over the syllabus, and it's basically the same as the syllabus for my 104 class last semester, and we will also be reviewing Chapter 2. We just assume that you have all repressed all the statistics and stuff from Chapter 2, so we go over it a second time. Additionally, I forgot to mention, for those of you who have not taken Psych 104, on eClass, I've uploaded my PowerPoint notes for Psych 104. That may be helpful. You may want to quickly look at that. It may catch you up on a few things, though it's not required to do well in the course. So this is my first time teaching Psych 105. I taught 104 last semester, as I mentioned, and I've also taught AP Psychology for a number of years, and the content in that is basically the same, but it's my first time teaching this material at the university level. I'll say a little bit about my background. I did the same thing last semester. So I started studying psychology in 2014, which feels, I can't believe it's been that long, but I came into college with an interest in philosophy. I was obsessed with philosophy, and I thought that taking a psychology course would give me some information about the mind that could help me with different philosophical topics I was interested in. But I fell in love with psychology. Went on to finish a bachelor's degree in psychology. Now, I temporarily gave philosophy a second chance. I did my master's in philosophy in the United States. But then I switched back to psychology for the PhD. I'm currently finishing my PhD here at the University of Alberta. I finished all the requirements except for defending the dissertation, but I'm not technically a professor, as I'll say later, so don't call me Professor Simpson. So I'm currently doing research with Kyle Nash, who some of you may go on to take classes with. He is a social neuroscientist here at the U of A. So I do research in his lab, and I'm also getting teaching experience, obviously. Okay, so what's the difference between Psych 104 and 105? The simple answer is, it's just different chapters from this book, and for those of you who took my 104, it's the same book. You already have the book. You just use the same book. 104 is on chapters 1 to 8 and 11. This class is on chapters 2, 9 to 10, and then 12 to the end of the book. Broadly speaking, 104 includes more of the science-y aspects of psychology. So there's a chapter on neuroscience, a chapter on genetics and evolution. There's a chapter that's almost entirely about animal conditioning, whereas 105 is more about the social science aspects of psychology. That's not a sharp distinction, but that should give you a rough sense of the different emphasis. So in this class, here's a list of some of the topics we'll be covering. Some of you are probably deciding which classes to stay in, so this will give you a sense of what we'll be discussing. Next week, we'll be looking at Chapter 9, and we'll be talking about how humans learn language, different aspects of what's called psycholinguistics, so the psychology of language processing. We'll be talking about reasoning and bias, different kinds of reasoning errors. After that, there's a chapter on intelligence. We'll be talking about the history of IQ tests, different types of IQ tests, and various issues related to that. There's a chapter on human development, especially child development. I mean, it goes through the whole lifespan, but most of the work is on development from like 0 to 20. The chapter after that is on social psychology, so how humans interact. This is somewhat continuous with the field of sociology, as I'll be mentioning later today. So we'll be talking about good things that relate to social interaction, like empathy and compassion, and we'll be talking about bad things like aggression and racism. After that is personality. I'm sure many of you are interested in personality. We'll be talking about different personality tests, what they measure. There's a chapter on practical implications of psychology for things like stress, health, and happiness. And lastly, the final 2 chapters are on psychological disorders, which I suspect is what most people intuitively think psychology is about. So various psychological disorders and various methods for treating psychological disorders. So that's a broad overview of what we'll be covering this semester. So, although as I say, before we get into any of that more fun stuff, we have to review chapter 2, which is on research methods and a little bit of statistics. Nothing too fancy though. So for those of you who took 104, that should be pretty easy though, because it's all review. Okay, so now I'm going to get into E-class. Now, before going into that, I'll just mention I did make some changes to the PowerPoint notes and the key terms in the last few days. So if you've already downloaded the 105 PowerPoint notes and the key terms, go ahead and re-download it. It won't affect anything I say this week. I haven't changed anything for chapter 2, but for some of the other chapters I added a few things. I may do that as the semester goes on, because it's my first time teaching. I may realize, oh, this is a really important concept, I should probably add it, but I'll always update you when that happens. So most of you have probably seen this already, but this is E-class. If you have not been on E-class, you should take a look at this. This is all very helpful. You will find this stuff very useful. So first of all, this is announcements. That's where I will post announcements, obviously. You should get an email whenever I post something there. So that'll alert you. So I won't post on there too often, but if it's really important, I'll put it on there. I'm going to come back to this later. This is where you post course questions. So have a look around you. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of students. And when you have a question, if it pertains to everyone, so if it's like a question about the syllabus or the content, just ask it here. I don't want to answer 10 different emails about what an independent variable is, right? So it's easier if I can just answer it there, because then everyone can see it. But if the question pertains to you, then obviously email me, and I'm happy to help out. I usually reply very quickly to emails. It makes my life easier because then they don't pile up. I'll come back to the syllabus in a second. For those of you who are in my 101 class, you'll know I post the lectures on YouTube. So you click on this link. As you can see, this is being filmed. So all the lectures will go on YouTube. So if I talk too fast or you miss something or whatever, you can watch them there. Here are directions to where my office is for office hours. And this is probably the most important thing, the list of key terms. This should be your new best friend, as I said to my Psych 104 class. This is your guide for what to focus on, both in lecture and when reading the textbook. If you know the list of key terms, that is most of your work. I'm not going to guarantee that every single thing on the test will be from there, but most of it will be. So if you know those terms, you'll be fine. These are PowerPoint notes. I'll say more about that actually in a second. And the APA template, don't worry about that. I'll talk about that after, I think, the second test. So for now, you don't really have to worry about that. Okay, let's talk about the syllabus. We're going to go through the syllabus. Most of your classes today will. Okay, so as you all should know, my name is David Simpson. People sometimes worry about what to call professors. You can call me David or Mr. Simpson. I don't care. Whatever's more comfortable for you. I'm still technically a PhD student, so I'm not Dr. Simpson or Professor Simpson. David or Mr. Simpson is fine. My office hours will be right after class. Literally after class, I just walk to my office, and office hours are there. If you can't make that time, so I'll stay there for an hour afterwards. If you want to meet with me but you can't make that time, just send me an email and we'll figure something out. And as I say, there are directions to my office because it is kind of a maze. The psych department is, it's a maze, that's all I'll say. There are 2 teaching assistants in this class. Please do not email them. Their job is not answering your emails. Their job is helping me with marking. Which again, that's a big job. So their job is not to answer emails. As I said, I typically respond to emails very quickly. I like to just get it out of the way. But before you send an email, just follow these guidelines. Double check the syllabus before asking a question. So Control F, see if the answer is there. Because I've tried to answer the obvious questions there. As I already mentioned, if you have a question that pertains to everyone, please post it on eClass course questions, and then email me if you've exhausted those options. And I'd rather you didn't use eClass messages, just use my email. That's the quickest way to get to me. And last point, I strongly encourage in-class questions. I assumed that there would not be very many because it was such a big class, but in 104 there were a lot of questions, and I thought that made the class more interesting, so I strongly encourage questions. You will have questions about this material. It's about you all, it's about human beings and human behavior, so questions make the class more interesting. The textbook. So I'm going to add a caveat here that I didn't say last time. So I'm going to say the textbook is required. That's what I've listed there and in the bookstore. However, I got a few comments from students last semester who were mad because they bought the textbook and felt that they didn't need it. They felt they didn't read it much and still were able to do well. So if you don't buy the textbook, do so at your own risk. But I'm not going to guarantee that you'll be able to get every question right. There may be some questions that only require the textbook, but some students have said that they felt they didn't need it. So if you're a free adult, you can do what you want with that information. As people who took 104 with me will already know, I do not use PowerPoint, at least not very much. I'll show the occasional picture, but I primarily use the whiteboard. I'm going to have to figure out how to get one of these to go up, otherwise it's going to be a little goofy. I'll probably have to just put it low down today, but I use the whiteboard primarily. I also show video clips. I think video clips are a great way to illustrate concepts, but I use almost no PowerPoint. If you feel like you really need PowerPoint, download the PowerPoint notes and use those. They won't follow the order of lecture exactly, but they'll be roughly in the same order. Actually, chapter 2 is an exception to that, but generally speaking, they follow the order of my lectures. You can also, of course, use them to study. I also have here some optional video resources. You can use those if you want. They're not testable, but they may help you. Those are playlists for psychology content. Here's the schedule. So as you can see, there's 4 tests. The first one's on 2 chapters. Next one's also on 2 chapters. Test 3 is a little longer. It's on 3 chapters. And then there is a cumulative final. Additionally, before every test, there is a test review day. That's a good day to come with questions. So that day serves 2 functions. Number 1, it's there if I talk too long and we kind of fall behind, I can finish whatever we didn't finish on that day. Additionally, I can do a kind of crash course run through all the content that we've done and leave it open for questions. So that's a good day to bring questions. Though of course I encourage questions at any time. Okay. I have here 4 study tips. These are tips for studying, obviously. And these are all experimentally corroborated. These are all research-supported ways to improve your memory of material. The first one is to test yourself, especially on the list of key terms. If you just reread things, it's easy to lull yourself into a false sense of security. There are studies showing that you take a group, you randomly assign them to two groups. One group reads material twice, the other reads it once and then gets tested on the material. The second group does better when you bring them back in a week and study, and test them. So you can take that list, go into a room where you're alone, and just say the definitions out loud and see how many you can do. This will both strengthen your memory of the material, but it will also let you know when you don't know something, right? You'll say it, and then you'll realize you don't make sense and don't know what the term means, which is then impetus to study more. You should also categorize the information. In 104, we talked about how chunking is a very effective memory technique. If you can put bits of information into groups, it makes it easier to store. Number 3, don't focus on memorizing the ideas, focus on understanding them. There's evidence that just repeating something to yourself over and over again is not the most effective technique. What you should be focusing on is deeply processing the information and making connections between that concept and other things that you know. Right? That will make it easier to remember. Lastly, expose yourself to the ideas multiple times and in multiple ways. So come to lecture, listen to the lecture, maybe rewatch it if a chapter was difficult, have a look at the book, the PowerPoint notes, and if you're feeling keen, maybe some of the videos from Crash Course and Paul Bloom that I have linked. Here's the grading scale. And I have something underlined here because I'm just going to say this up front. And some people still ask me for this, even though I was very clear that I was not going to do this. There will be no changes to final grades based on student requests. If you send me a sad email saying, Mr. Simpson, I wanted an A-, but I got a B+ and I'm so depressed, and now my life is ruined and whatever, I'm not going to change your grade. As I said to my 104 class, it's not fair for me to give you a better grade just because you're really good at writing a sad email. So just do your best and let the chips fall where they may. As people who took my class will tell you, the tests are not designed to trick you. They test the key terms primarily and some other stuff, but if you understand what I say in lecture and have a look at the book, you'll do fine. This class, you can do well in this class. You do not have to be Einstein to get a good grade. Here's a breakdown of the grades. So first 2 tests are 15% and so on. The APA assignment, I'll say a bit more about that in a second. Research participation doesn't start now. Actually, most of you took 104, so most of you know what that is. But basically, for those of you who didn't take 104, you'll have to participate in some experiments with psychologists. As I said last time, psychologists are cheap. We don't like paying people, so we get university undergraduates to do our studies. That's an easier way to get big samples. Here's the breakdown of the test. You can have a look at that, and you'll know what's coming. Tests 1 and 2 are shorter, but you still only have 1 hour and 20 minutes to do them, so you should be aiming to be done them in under an hour. If it takes you over an hour, then that's a sign you should study more for tests 3 and 4, which are both a little bit longer. The APA assignment, which is the only writing that you have to do, at least outside of the tests. Each test will have 1 written component. And actually, by the way, I'll say right now, the written component of the tests, tests 1 through 3, test 4 is entirely multiple choice. The written component of the test I view almost as like an in-class mini essay, because I will basically tell you what the question will be in advance. Because I don't really see much of a point of assigning essays to take home, because then I'm just asking you whether you know that ChatGPT exists. So I think better to have those in class. But the APA assignment, which by the way I strongly recommend not trying ChatGPT with, because whenever I get ChatGPT, like I've tried to see if it can do it, to summarize books or papers, it hallucinates. It makes up stuff that is not real. So this one, I do not recommend using it for. All you will have to do is summarize a peer-reviewed academic psychology article in 1 to 2 paragraphs. And I'm not looking for brilliant prose. I'm just looking for you to write something that makes sense. Most of your marks come from doing APA style correctly. And I've uploaded a template, so I assumed this would be easy marks, but lots of people in 104 still manage to mess it up. Don't be creative, follow the template, and just write a summary of the article that makes sense. This should be easy marks. And I will be strict about lateness. Hand it in early to avoid having a technical issue. If it's 1 minute late, past midnight, that's 1% off. Every day is 1% off out of the 10. So you go down to 9 even if you got perfect. So just upload early to be safe. Oh, and this should be obvious, but in a class of 300 people, there will be some people who don't understand obvious things. Do not re-upload your Psych 104 assignment if you were in Psych 104 with me. I have a very good memory. If I get an assignment that I've read before, it will be a 0. So upload something different. Research participation, so yeah, on eClass there's a section that will explain that in detail. And Carleen, who runs research participation, wrote a sentence in that summary that I love. It's my favorite sentence on eClass. Do not email your instructor about research participation. And I was like, oh, Carleen, you are the best person ever. So she's the one to contact, and she has a helpful explanation of how that will work. Okay, one other thing I have to, I guess, mention is missed tests. This is a very large class. If it was a smaller class and I kind of knew everyone, maybe I could be more flexible about this, but I am going to be strict about documentation. If you know you're going to miss a test, saying, you know, I don't really feel like it, or I feel that's not going to be good enough, I need some kind of documentation. You know, doctor's note, death certificate, something like that. And I say death certificate. People in 104 will know this story, but I had a professor who gave a similar spiel to the one I just gave about documentation, and he said that, you know, around midterms, grandmas drop like flies. Everyone's grandma dies around a midterm, and so he said, look, I need documentation to show that your grandma actually died. And someone sent this professor their grandmother's ashes to prove that. So please don't do that. A death certificate or something is fine. I know stuff happens, but since it's a big class, I do need some kind of documentation. Okay, last comment about the syllabus, and then we'll move on to actual content. So there are no practice tests. I do not upload practice tests, but the way you can think about it is each test is kind of a practice test for the future ones. The multiple choice, which is the biggest chunk, should be roughly the same level of difficulty for all of them. And the first 2 tests are each 15%, so not very high pressure. So if you feel comfortable with those, you should be fine for the bigger tests, right? Tests 3 and 4. Okay, so that's all I have to say about the syllabus. Any questions about anything I've said about eClass or the syllabus? Yep.
So for the textbook, are any of the questions on the test going to be like from the textbook exactly, or like?
That's possible. I haven't made the tests yet. Here's what I'll say. I can't guarantee that every single thing on the test will be covered in lecture. Most will. I'm not going to make a guarantee one way or another. So if you choose to not get the textbook, do so at your own risk. You certainly will be able to do well. You just might not get every last question. Other questions? Yeah.
Are the exams going to be written on paper, or is it going to be like a
Yes.
like an e-class? Okay.
They'll be in class. Oh, and also, speaking of which, because I don't want emails about this either, the final exam is not during exam week. It is here on the last day of class. And yes, they will all be on paper, like Scantron, and the written will be like on the back of the booklet. Other questions? Okay. So this will be a little goofy because there's not as much room here, but I'm going to start with the absolute basics. And that's what is psychology. So for those of you who are 104, this will be a review. The word psychology comes from two, by the way, can you guys see this? Raise your hand if you cannot see this. Okay, I'll make it a little more. Is it because it's too small or because of this? Like, is this blocking it for anyone?
So this table is.
Sorry?
For us, the table is.
Oh, the table. Okay, okay. Here, I'll move it. So the word psychology breaks down into two words, psyche and logos. Psyche meaning mind or soul, and logos meaning word or discourse or study of. So psychology is the scientific study of the human mind and human behavior. That's the definition of psychology. And the word there that's important is scientific. Psychology, at least we hope we want it to be, an empirical discipline. This is a word that I emphasized in 104. Can anyone from my 104 class remind everyone what empirical means?
It means based on observed evidence.
Yes, exactly. Based on observation or evidence. It should be based on what you can see or hear or detect, with the five senses. This distinguishes psychology from philosophy. Now, as I mentioned, I have a background in philosophy. I'm not anti-philosophy. In fact, I'm teaching a class on philosophical issues in psychology next semester. But philosophy is different from psychology. Even though philosophers ask many of the same questions, or at least questions that are adjacent to those in psychology, philosophers do not rely on observation. They use they use logic and arguments. They just think about things, and argue about it with each other. Whereas in psychology, we think that's not good enough. Just thinking about things, at best, can give you a guess or a hypothesis. But to know if it's true, you have to test it with empirical evidence. So that's a very important thing to know. Additionally, it's the scientific study of human behavior, and more specifically, individual behavior. Psychology is different from sociology. How many of you are in a sociology class? All right, so obviously a closely related field. The difference between sociology and psychology is that sociology studies human behavior at the group level of analysis, not the individual level of analysis. So for example, in chapter 13, we'll be talking about racism and prejudice. In psychology, we care about what's going on in people's heads when they, say, form stereotypical beliefs or something. In sociology, they would construe racism as a societal or structural process. They would emphasize the group level dynamics involved. So that's another good distinction to keep in mind. Additionally, it's helpful to know the relationship of psychology to the other sciences. In the standard scientific picture of the world, psychology is reducible to biology, and biology is reducible to chemistry, and chemistry is reducible to physics. That's kind of the hierarchy of the sciences. So here's what I mean by that. So psychology, as I said, is the study of the human mind and human behavior. Well, what explains why we are able to think and behave in the ways that we can? And the answer, the standard scientific answer is, it's our brain. And other parts of the body contribute to it, but primarily the brain. So psychology is basically just complicated biology. It's a kind of higher level of analysis of something that is ultimately a biological process. And then what is biology? Biology is just complicated chemistry. That's why organic chemistry is a field, right? The brain is just a bunch of chemical reactions. It's just sodium and potassium moving through voltage gates. It's explicable in terms of the underlying chemistry. Chemistry is the study of how chemicals behave, and ultimately that's reducible to physics. It's just atoms obeying the laws of physics, at least in the standard scientific way of thinking about it. So that should help you relate psychology to other things that you may be studying. Now, why do we need psychology? Why do we need a science of the mind? After all, some people have a good kind of intuitive sense of how people work. I do not count myself as one of those types, but if you're very extroverted or very, you can read people well, you may think, I don't need psychology, I can just rely on my intuition. As Sean Carroll will say later in a video that I'll show, human beings are not as smart as we think we are. It's important to remember, we are only around 2% genetically different from chimpanzees. And according to some estimates, that is a smaller difference than the difference between Asian elephants and African elephants. So you look at Asian elephants and African elephants, if you just count the strands of DNA, they have more genetic differences than we do with chimps. It's really amazing that we've gotten as far as we have when you remember that. One specific type of irrationality that I think is very important to know about, and we'll be talking about this next week, is confirmation bias. Can anyone tell me what confirmation bias is?
It's like looking at a piece of information later on and being like, oh yeah, that's what I thought it was. I believe.
Close. That would be hindsight bias.
That's hindsight bias.
No worries. Yeah.
Is it when you only choose to look at information that supports?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So you selectively look at and interpret evidence in a way that favors what you already believe. We all do this. This is a very ubiquitous bias. There's kind of a joke definition of confirmation bias, which is that's how other people reason. But that's not true. Everyone is subject to confirmation bias. We like being proven right. We don't like being proven wrong. And in part to correct this, in science, we emphasize the importance of making our theories falsifiable, or what you can call falsifiability. We want our theories to be able to be proven wrong. If a theory cannot be proven wrong, then that theory is unfalsifiable. And that might sound good, like, oh yeah, it's indestructible, it can't be proven wrong, but that is in fact not good. A good scientific theory is one that leads to predictions that can be tested, which means they can be proven wrong. The basic structure in science is you make a guess or a hypothesis, you make something up, you see what the consequences of that guess are, right? What you say, if this guess is true, what would this guess imply? Right? What can I derive from this guess? And now I'm out of room, but then you compare the predictions of the guess to observation. Right? To an experiment or some other piece of evidence. And if the predictions of the guess disagree with observation, then the guess is wrong. That's what how falsifiability is cashed out. If your guess disagrees with experiments, then the guess is wrong. In everyday life, when we make a prediction and it turns out wrong, it's very tempting to try and explain away the bad evidence and keep your belief. But in science, we say, no, you shouldn't do that. You should just accept that your idea has been falsified and start over.
I have a question for you. Just with like falsifiable ability, why we wouldn't want to just snuff that out though, because a lot of theories and whatnot that have been made over the past 100 years are non-falsifiable, and they've contributed greatly to the advancements. They were just behind their education in that moment, right? Because
Good. Yeah, so I actually agree. So what I'm saying now is definitely oversimplification. In next semester, I'm actually teaching a class on philosophy of science. What I've said is definitely an oversimplification. Here's what I would say though about specifically your question about unfalsifiable ideas being helpful. So gotta be careful, I go on a tangent, but the philosopher who introduced this idea of falsifiability is Karl Popper, who's my favorite. When he introduced this idea of falsifiability, he's not saying that unfalsifiable ideas are bad or meaningless. You know, there are ethical ideas, maybe ideas about metaphysics in philosophy that are not falsifiable, but they still may be important for various reasons. What Popper would say, and I'm inclined to agree, is they're just not science. In science, they have to be falsifiable, but that doesn't mean that unfalsifiable ideas are useless or have no place. That's what I would say about that. It's a good question, though. Other questions about this? Oh, I thought someone was saying yeah. And if it gets too loud, I might ask for the doors to be closed. In fact, can someone close the doors on each side? Someone who's close. Yeah, someone back there too, please. Thank you. 5% bonus. Just so one quick example that I'll give of falsifiability, and then I'll move on to the book, is Einstein. So a very famous example. Einstein's theory was a guess. It's a complex mathematical guess, but it made a very specific prediction. So the theory posits, among other things, that space can be curved by gravity. Massive objects can curve space, and this leads to a prediction. If the sun is here, and the Earth is here, and there's a star over here, the star's light should be curved by the sun, and therefore it should appear here rather than here. Right? When you look up at the star, the details of this don't matter. All you need to know, in fact, you don't need to know this at all, it's just an illustration. This is not a physics class. But Einstein's theory predicts that the star should appear here instead of here, based on the gravity of the sun. Now, normally you can't test that, because you look up in the middle of the day, you can't see the stars. But you can when there's an eclipse. When the sun is blocked by the moon, you can actually see the stars. And so you just measure, is the star where Einstein says it should be? If it's not, then his guess is wrong. Right? So that's a very good example of how science should work. So you make risky, testable predictions in advance. Okay, and I believe, yes, that's all I have to say by way of just general introduction to the science of psychology. And now I'll actually start getting into the book. But any last questions about this stuff? So if you have the book, you can flip to beginning of chapter 2. I'll be mostly following the order of the book. I usually don't see a lot of books in class, even though I recommend it. I hate online books. I strongly, like for me, like this is what I do with my book. I write it up, and I think that's a better way to go about doing it.
I think your microphone cut out.
Oh. Okay.
There we go.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I see it's flashing red. So it's probably almost out of batteries. Am I audible again?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to follow along in the book, I'm on page 37. So we're going to go through chapter 2. So as I say, this is largely review. The chapter starts off with a discussion of scientific attitudes. This may seem unusual as a place to start, but scientific attitudes are part of the answer for why science is successful. So there are many reasons why science is successful, one of which I've already said, which is it relies on observation. It's also successful because it involves the use of mathematics, which allows you to be very precise in your description of phenomena. It's also successful because of explanatory theories. But an underappreciated reason for the success of science is attitudes. Various attitudes that a scientific education is supposed to drum into. And the book mentions 3. The first is skepticism. Actually, sorry, the first is curiosity. Skepticism is next. And then the last is open-mindedness. So curiosity, actually that might not be visible, but whatever, you guys know the word curiosity. So curiosity is that urge to understand why things are the way they are. There is a famous apocryphal story about Isaac Newton, that he was sitting under a tree and he saw an apple fall from the tree and asked himself, why does it fall down instead of up? As I say, this story is probably apocryphal, it probably didn't happen, but it's a good kind of parable for how a scientist should think. A scientist should look at things that seem obvious and commonsensical and ask, why is it like that? Right? An average person might look at Newton and say, why are you asking such a dumb question? Obviously apples fall down instead of up. But the fact that Newton asked that question was very productive. Right? It led to a very fruitful research. And the same is true for psychology. We will be asking about things that should seem kind of obvious, but you have to have that attitude of curiosity. Yes?
Your mic again.
I turned it down a bit. But people in the back, show of hands, you can still hear me? I just felt a bit of an echo, so I thought I'd turn it down a bit. Or is it completely off? Is it off?
We can't remember at the front.
As long as you can hear me, I don't really care.
I was gonna say maybe turn it up a little bit, see if it is.
Oh, okay, so am I loud again?
Yeah.
Is this better?
It,
Oh, okay, I'll stick with that then. Okay, so that's curiosity, so you have to have that urge to understand why things are the way they are. The second one is skepticism. Actually, on skepticism, I actually have a video. This is my first video clip of the semester. So, Sean Carroll, who's a physicist, is going to say a little bit about how this works. Okay, so well said by Sean. So as he says there, in science, the ideal is that we would be constantly challenging our own ideas and not kind of just blindly accepting ideas. Right? The attitude that a scientist should have is, show me. Don't just tell me, but show me. And one quote that really summarizes this well is, and this is not testable, but nullius in verba. This was the slogan of the Royal Society in the UK when it started. It was one of the first scientific societies in the world. Nullius in verba means take no one's word for it. Take no one's word for it, which is a good summary of that attitude of skepticism. Oh, sorry, it has 2 L's. I don't know what it matters. And then the last one is open-mindedness. You don't just cling to your favorite ideas, you are open to them being challenged and changing them in response to evidence. You don't just reject an idea because it makes you uncomfortable or because it disagrees with what you already believe. You are willing to have your mind changed by evidence. I mentioned the name Karl Popper, who came up with the idea of falsifiability. He has a good quote where he says, you know, my basic attitude is I may be wrong, you may be right. Together, by an effort, we might get closer to the truth. Right? That's a good summary of what open-mindedness looks like. I may be wrong, you may be right. Okay. Nothing too fancy there, but any questions about the idea of scientific attitudes? Okay. The book then goes through the different steps in the scientific process. This should be reviewed, even if you haven't taken 104. It's a pretty standard summary of the steps of the scientific process. And actually, my friend sent me a meme. I thought it was a pretty good summary of them. So that really sums it all up right there. F around, find out. So the F around part starts off with a guess, right? Starts off with a conjecture. Although I should say, this isn't exactly the same order as the book. Maybe I'll go back to the videos page. But step 1 in the book's summary of it is identify a question of interest. So there's actually, I don't know this at all. You identify some topic you want to ask questions about. So the example the book gives is the murder of Kitty Genovese, wherein a woman was repeatedly stabbed in New York City, and dozens of people were nearby in apartment buildings, and they didn't even call 911. So that's kind of depressing. You know, we like to think of ourselves as a good species, but why did no one do anything? Step 2 is you make a guess. You form a hypothesis. So the guess that psychologists made, 2 researchers made, is maybe it's because of how many people live in New York. Maybe it's because it's so crowded, and when there's more people, you are less likely to help because you think someone else will do it. Now, they don't know that, that's just a guess. So then step 3 is you test the guess. You test the hypothesis. So they did a series of experiments in which they would bring people into the lab and stage an emergency that looked realistic, and they randomly assigned people to different conditions where they were in rooms with more or less people. And if you were in a room with more people, you are less likely to intervene. That's what they found. So when you vary how many people are in a room, or when you increase, I should say, how many people are in a room, you decrease the likelihood that anyone will help. So that tentatively supports the hypothesis they made. Step 4, I guess, goes along with that. You have to analyze the data to see whether or not your guess has been supported or falsified. And step 5 is, over time, you conduct more experiments and try to put together a body of knowledge and some kind of explanatory theory. It's not enough in science to just do one experiment. You could have been lazy when you were doing the statistics, maybe you're biased, maybe whatever. So it's important for multiple labs to do the same study and try to converge on kind of a common pattern. So that's step 5. Okay, something that came up earlier that's also important as how not to do things, is hindsight bias, right? Which is, once you know something, it's very easy to say, oh, I already knew that, or that's obvious. In science, it's not enough to just explain things in hindsight, which is easy to do. You have to make predictions, which I've already emphasized. You have to make predictions about experiments before they take place. The bread and butter of scientific studies is variables. Variables are factors or traits that differ between people. I mean, it could be differ between, molecules, but we don't study molecules, so for us it's people. So things that are different between people. The variables in psychology, unfortunately, are very difficult to define. There is disagreement about how to define even basic concepts in psychology, which is a problem. We are interested in variables like self-esteem, happiness, intelligence, and if you want to, do something, go home and try to write down a one-sentence definition of intelligence that does not use any synonyms like smart or brainy or something. You'll find that it's actually quite hard. And it's not only hard for lay people or beginners in psychology, experts in psychology disagree about how to define intelligence. However, in any science, it is important that concepts be precise and well-defined. As kind of an ideal. That's what we aim at. And by the way, a lot of the things I'm describing in chapter 1 are ideals. They're not always practiced. I mean, for example, think of the scientific attitudes, right? So skepticism and open-mindedness, for example. Scientists are human beings. They are not always completely rational, right? We say when we give talks like this, yes, you should always try to prove your theory wrong. In reality, scientists often like their theory and don't want to give it up, but it's an ideal. And the same is true for precision, right? Having precise definitions. We are not always as precise as we should be. One solution, though, to make the concepts more precise is to give operational definitions. To give an operational definition of something is to define it in terms of how it's measured. So you have to define it in a way that connects with some kind of observable, measurable behavior. So for example, I mentioned intelligence. There's a whole chapter in this book on intelligence. Philosophers, psychologists can argue about what the word intelligence means, but when you do an experiment of some kind, you have to give some kind of precise definition. And the standard way of doing this, as I'm sure many of you would guess, is IQ tests. Right? So you write a psychology journal article, you do an experiment, and you say, okay, we're talking about intelligence. In this paper, when we say intelligence, we mean IQ score. Even though we know IQ tests are not without problems, but we have to be precise, so provisionally that's how we're going to define intelligence. It's your score on an IQ test. You might be measuring self-esteem. Okay, you define self-esteem as your score on a self-esteem scale that some psychologist made. Scale probably isn't perfect, but it's something precise that you can work with in the study. Any questions about that? Okay, there are different ways of measuring psychological traits, and the easiest way is self-report. If you want to know how happy someone is, how sad they are, how extroverted they are, how many video games they play in a week. You ask them, hey, how happy are you? How depressed are you? How much do you like people? So this is often all we can do, but there are obvious problems with this. My supervisor has written out some of the pitfalls of relying on self-report. One that is in the book, it's a testable term, is social desirability bias. Which is a bias towards saying things that you think will make you socially desirable. So you want to make yourself look good. As you all know, I hope, people are not always 100% honest. So people may sometimes bend their answers to self-report scales to make themselves look better. As we'll be seeing in the chapter on personality, there are some techniques for getting around this. One of them is introducing lie scales. You won't be tested on that for chapter 2, but the way those work is you randomly put in a few questions where the socially desirable answer is true of almost no one. I think the example I gave in 104 was like, I don't know if this is a real one, but have you ever missed a day of flossing? And if you say, no, never, it's like, okay, maybe you're the 1 in a million, but probably you're just bending the truth. And if you give 10 questions like that, and they give the socially desirable answer for all of them, probably you can discard their data, right? They're probably just bending answers to make themselves look good. Additionally, you can use measures of overt behavior, so just measure how people behave. So reaction time is one example. Let's say you're measuring extroversion. You want to know how much people like people. You could ask them, or you could do some behavioral measure, like keep track of how many parties they go to. Or you put them in a room and you measure how many times they introduce themselves to new people. Some kind of overt, measurable behavior like that. And lastly, you can use physiological measures. You can measure different bodily reactions that you think are associated with different psychological traits or processes. So you can measure someone's heart rate as a way of getting at their anxiety. Galvanic skin response, things like that would all be useful. And of course, the physiological measures that we care the most about are measures of brain activity. We won't be talking about that as much in 105, but it will come up occasionally. So that's what my lab does. My lab is, it does a few things, but one thing it does is EEG. We scan people's brains with EEG while they are doing various psychological tasks and try to find patterns there. Okay. I have another video. This video is an example of combining multiple of these measures. This one combines overt behavior and physiological measures. This is cutting-edge research. This was done by one of my supervisors at Georgia State University, which is where I did my master's. I was not involved in this study, but I'm proud to have worked with him. So we'll watch this as an example. By the way, the last video, was it audible? Give a thumbs up if you could hear it. Okay. So we'll watch. Okay. So that's a cutting-edge example. He goes on in the TED Talk to discuss what I'm sure many of you are thinking of, which is various potential ethical problems with this research. He's aware of that. I just show that as an example of ways to combine different types of measurement. Yes. I don't know. That's a good question. This is not the area I worked on with him. I should know this. I'll Google it later. If you didn't hear, this person asked, has it been replicated? Which is a very good question. In science, as I'll say towards the end of the chapter, replication is very important. And it's often the case that you can find a result in one study, but given how you did the analysis, it may not replicate. So yeah, this is one talk. This is not like the final ultimate truth about this topic. So yes, good question. Okay. Speaking of measurement in psychology, there are two very important terms that you have to know about what makes a good measurement. What makes a measurement a good measurement? One of these is not in the chapter, but it will be coming up in great detail in chapter 10, and you should know the basics of it for chapter 2. So the book does mention the term reliability, having reliable measures. But it does not mention, not in this chapter, validity, but they go together in almost every other book I've seen, so I'll talk about both of them. Note, when I say validity, in this context I mean validity of a measurement. We will see a different sense of the term validity later in the chapter. Not today, we won't have time. But in this context, I mean validity of a measurement. So, reliability is about how consistent a measurement is. How consistent are the results that you get from a measurement. So, IQ is the easiest example to give. So, suppose I make a new IQ test, I give it to Fred, and the first time he takes it, he has an IQ of 145, and the next time he takes it, he has an IQ of 62. Okay, that's a pretty bad test. It's not reliable. You get different results at different administrations. So reliability is important, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough to have a reliable test. You can have a test that is very reliable, but not valid, or lacking validity. Validity is about, does the test measure what it's supposed to measure? So, for example, this is an example I made up, it's my favorite example. Suppose I make a new IQ test, and here's how it works. I measure a person's left pinky toe. The length of their left pinky toe determines what their IQ score is. That would be a very reliable test, right? It would be, unless you have an accident, it will be the same IQ score every time. But clearly it's not valid. It's not measuring what it's supposed to measure. So you want a test or a measurement to have both. In chapter 10, we'll be seeing different ways to get validity. Validity is a bit more theoretical. It's a bit tougher to nail down. Just as an example, one way of getting at validity is, does the test predict things that it should predict? So for example, if a scale purports to measure intelligence, it should be correlated or predict grades. Not perfectly, but there should be. If it doesn't predict your grades at all, it's kind of a stretch to say it's measuring intelligence. So we'll talk about that a lot in chapter 10. But for now, you just need to know the rough distinction. So very important distinction. Any questions about those two terms? Okay. So we will now talk about different research methods, different ways of studying behavior. We won't have time to get into too many, but I'll start with a few that are easy to explain. So there's an umbrella of types of research called descriptive research, which is research that doesn't involve an experimental manipulation. Right? You're just describing what you see. One example of descriptive research is a case study, which is an in-depth study of either a single person or a small number of people. So this is commonly used in neuroscience because with humans we can't destroy people's brains for research. It's very sad. We would like to, but the ethics board won't let us. We can only do that with animals. So with animals, ethics is a lot more loose. So we know a lot more about animal neuroscience than human neuroscience because we can destroy parts of the brain. By the way, for those of you who weren't on the forum, I'm joking about me being sad about not destroying brains, just for those of you who don't know. But yeah, so in the case of neuroscience, what we can do is do case studies. As you all know, people often do foolish things, and sometimes those foolish things result in brain damage. And that makes the neuroscientists like me very happy, because then we can look at, if they damage this part of the brain, we can see what they can't do anymore, and then we can infer, that part of the brain must have been important for that particular psychological task. Case studies are used outside of neuroscience as well, but that's just an example. Another type of descriptive research is naturalistic observation. Which is where you observe people behaving in their, quote, natural environment. So you don't bring them into the lab, you don't do any fancy measurements, you just watch them behave and you try to find patterns in how they behave. So this is often a good way to generate new ideas. It's generally not rigorous enough to get published in a psychology journal because there's no experimental manipulation or control. You're just trying to look and see patterns. So there's different things you could do. You could go to like a schoolyard and watch kids play with permission from the school, I would recommend. If you want to discover maybe patterns in bullying behavior or something. But ideally, you would take your ideas that you got from this and then test them with an experiment or something like that. Any questions about those? The next section is on survey research, but there's only 5 minutes left and it's the first day of class. Let's stop there. So I'll see you all on Thursday. Have a look at each class if you have not done so.